Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your horoscope for Cancer and Cancer rising for the entire year ahead of 2020. So, all right, I'm doing a solo show for this one. The last few horoscopes I had either Cam White or Leisa Schaim joining me, but they're kind of worn out, so I'm going to do this on my own for tonight. I was having some technical difficulties earlier, otherwise I would have started this live stream a few hours ago. But let's jump right into it and see how many horoscopes I can get through tonight. All right, so preliminaries. So first things first, these are rising sign horoscopes. So you can either look at this from the perspective of your sun sign, if your sun was in the zodiac sign of Cancer when you were born, especially if you were born during the day, or if your moon was located in Cancer, especially if you were born at night. But I recommend especially looking at these horoscopes from the perspective of your rising sign, because that allows us to use the 12 houses. And that's something I'm going to be focusing on a lot, is giving you a sort of big picture overview of the astrology of the next 12 months, especially based on where the outer planets are transiting through the 12 houses and the 12 different sectors of your chart that represent different parts of your life. So, hey, everybody, thanks for joining me in the live stream. We're back again tonight. So let's jump right into it. All right, so we're going to be looking at a couple of things. One of the things we're going to look at is the planetary movements chart and calendar, which is from a poster I just published this year. And it shows where the planets start in the signs of the zodiac at the beginning of the year and how far through the signs of the zodiac they will get by the end of the year. So some of the planets are really quick, like the inner planets like Mercury or Venus, whereas there's other planets that move very slowly, like the outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which will largely just go through one or maybe two signs during the course of a year. We're also going to be looking at the planetary movements calendar, or planetary alignments calendar, that shows the ingresses when planets move into different signs of the zodiac on different days during the course of the year, as well as retrograde stations and lunations, which are new moons and full moons. All right, so let's start from the very top in January. So there's three major things happening in January. So first things first, we've got a lunation. We've got a lunar eclipse that's taking place in Cancer on the 10th of January. So this is part of a series of eclipses that have been happening for about a year and a half right now, that are bouncing back and forth between Cancer, which is your first house of body and mind and your sense of self, and the seventh house, which is Capricorn, which represents relationships and partnership in your life and other close one-on-one relationships in general. So there was probably something especially that you initiated 6 months ago during the last solar eclipse, which was in Cancer in the Northern Hemisphere last summer, that is culminating or being brought to completion now that we're having this lunar eclipse starting on the 10th of the month here in January. So for a lot of you, this is part of something that's been going on for a while now, for at least a year, maybe a year and a half, as we've been having eclipses bouncing back and forth between those two signs and having to balance out themes having to do with your sense of self versus your sense of others, and what you have to do in order to maintain those relationships and keep them balanced, or figuring out what to do when those relationships become unbalanced. So sometimes you can err more on the side of putting more into relationships and not keeping back enough for yourself. And other times you can be maybe keeping more to yourself and not putting enough into your relationships. And in either instance, it creates sort of an imbalance. So that eclipse is going to represent a new development in one part of that. The other part, of course, is that we just had a solar eclipse at the very end of December, which is in your seventh house of relationships. And honestly, that's where a lot of the action is going to be happening this year, is in that seventh house in Capricorn. So let's go back to our ingress chart. So we've got the lunar eclipse that's taking place in a culmination of events with respect to your sense of selfhood and either bodily matters in terms of your physical vitality or developments related to your character on the 10th of the month. We also have Uranus stationing direct in Taurus in your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances. So that's part of a long-term transit that's going to take most of the next part of the decade. So at least I think another like 5 or 6 years of Uranus transiting through your 11th house of friends, which can bring some unexpected disruptions, but also some excitement and some innovation in the area of friendship, where especially if things have been sort of fixed and sort of stable in that area of your life for a long time, they can suddenly become a little bit unstable, but sometimes that can be disorienting and can be problematic, but other times it can be exciting because it can import some excitement into the area of friendship that maybe didn't exist there previously. So you might have a friend come into your life that has or sort of represents Uranus in some way that can be kind of rebellious or could kind of shake things up, but in a positive manner that might bring needed change to your life over the course of the next decade. So we're still in the very early phases of that transit, but having Uranus stationed there this month is usually going to be one of the important turning points where there should be some related development that pushes things in that direction as we're still moving into that transit, being only like a year or two into it, I think. So that Uranus station is happening around the 9th or the 10th, which is around the same time as that eclipse we were just talking about, the lunar eclipse in Cancer. Other things that are going on this month, Mars ingresses into Sagittarius on the 3rd, so it's already there by the time I'm recording this video. It's going into Sagittarius into your 6th house, which is the place of work and health, but also that which you have to do to maintain health or that which you have to do in order to improve your health when things go awry. So sometimes it can mean putting greater emphasis or effort into that area. Other times it can mean running into issues or challenges in the sphere of health matters. So definitely be careful this month not to push yourself too hard, just because Mars transits can sometimes, if a person goes too far, indicate like injuries or accidents or something like that. The other major thing we have going on this month that I should mention is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is taking place in your 7th house. So this is part of a long-term transit that's been going on for quite a while now. So Pluto's been in your 7th house of relationships for more than a decade now, since 2008. And more importantly, Saturn's been transiting through your 7th house of relationships since 2 years ago, since December of 2017. So for many people, this can bring a period of restructuring when it comes to relationships in general. And for some of you, that's going to be more constructive, like it's going to mean putting in the hard work and maybe encountering some obstacles in relationships. But by the end of the 3-year transit, which will end later this year in December, coming out of it in a sort of better place than when you entered it 2 years ago. For others, it might be more challenging or might indicate having to walk away from certain relationships if they're not serving you in a way that's constructive, or if they've reached the sort of end of their life cycle at that point. So a lot of you might be questioning whether you're at that stage in a current relationship and whether it's going to sort of pass the test that it's currently going through, or whether it's time to sort of let it go if it's no longer working out for you. So we're getting towards the end of that transit. We're 2 years into this 3-year transit. So we're in the last phases of it. So most of you should already have some sense of how it was going to go or how it's been going. If you have your ascendant degree very late in Cancer, then you may still see the culmination of that transit over the course of the next year, but it shouldn't necessarily be something brand new that comes out of nowhere that you haven't been experiencing to some extent already, or that you don't have some idea of at this point, since it's been building up and occurring for a while now. And one other thing I should mention about the Capricorn transits is that we don't just have Saturn going through Capricorn this year, because we've had that for the past 2 years, and that's been kind of a heavy, sometimes a difficult or sometimes a low energy period for relationships. But this year we've got a little bit of an offsetting or a balancing influence, because Jupiter just moved into Capricorn a month or two ago. And Jupiter tends to bring stabilization and expansion. So there's two sort of dueling energies that are going on this year. One of them is the contraction energy of Saturn going through your 7th house of relationships. But the other one is the opposite, which is the expansion energy of Jupiter going through your seventh house of relationships. And you'll probably feel then competing desires or competing impulses to maybe pursue a relationship, or other times to seek solitude and maybe avoid relationships. And trying to figure out a way to balance those two is going to be probably one of the major challenges for you over the next 12 months. There'll be some alleviation of that when Saturn goes into Aquarius and leaves your seventh house between March and June, and it'll leave just Jupiter there, which is going to be more positive and more favorable for relationships. But then Saturn will eventually come back in the second half of the year to sort of test things out and see or complete the final chapter of whatever that transit was about for you in terms of your personal relationships. All right, so going back to the transit chart, those are the three major outer planet transits so far for January. Let's check in on the chat and see. Okay, we got a lot of people joining us. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me in the live stream chat. Thanks to Steve Malecki for the donation. Appreciate it. People are talking about the eclipses. If anybody has any anecdotes or interesting stories so far about either eclipse stories that they've had in certain houses or other major transits, please let me know. Otherwise, let's keep moving to February. All right, so here's the transits for February. There's only really one, I guess there's two major things. One of them is the Mercury retrograde. The other is Mars ingressing into Capricorn. So I've already just spent a bit of time talking about the Saturn transit that's been going on for 2 years in the sphere of relationships for you in the seventh house, and talking about the 1 year Jupiter transit through your seventh house, which just began like a month or two ago, around December-ish or early December. There's another planet that joins all of those, which is Mars on the 16th of February. So when Mars ingresses into your seventh house, again, this can bring a period that'll last for about a month or so. It'll last for a few weeks of greater energy and effort and just energy expenditure that you'll have to put towards relationships for a period of time. In the best case scenario, in the more difficult scenario, Mars transits through the seventh house can indicate a shorter term period of tension and sometimes difficulty or strife within the context of relationships, where especially if there's something that hasn't been working out about a relationship recently, you can find yourself being a little bit more irritable and a little bit more prone towards either picking fights with a partner picking fights with you, or even having the experience of severing or separation in relationships, which can either come from you deciding that you need to cut somebody out of your life, or somebody else potentially doing that more towards you. So that doesn't have to be the case. It's going to depend on your birth chart, especially those with night charts are probably not going to be experiencing that as being as challenging, whereas those with day charts might experience that transit as being a little bit more tumultuous. But either way, it's probably not the end of the world, but certainly something to be aware of. And especially if you find yourself getting into more conflicts with a partner during that time, sort of calming yourself down and assessing whether that's what you want to be doing, or whether you're just feeling more irritable in some sense during that time period, or more inclined towards conflicts than you might be at other times in your life. So that's part of the major shift that happens in February. The other major thing that happens is we have a Mercury retrograde period that begins in Pisces conjunct Neptune on the 16th of February, right around the same time. So that retrograde, it looks like, is taking place in your ninth house of education, philosophy, religion, and foreign travel. So sometimes a Mercury retrograde conjunct Neptune can indicate miscommunication, or having a period where there's like a sequence of events where there's some sort of snafu that takes place. So if you're going on a trip or a journey, there's certain issues like delays that you could just be careful to dot all of your I's and cross all of your T's in terms of making sure that your travel plans are relatively solid and you didn't make any mistakes when you're booking it. But also one of the things that you can do during Mercury retrograde periods is just be more flexible if things do go awry, to sort of go with the flow and deal with it during that time, instead of trying to be more like fixed and immovable, or like not able to adapt to the circumstances or the situation that happens at that time. Mercury retrogrades always demand the greatest amount of flexibility from a person. And yeah, happening in your ninth house could be something about a trip. It could be something related to education, or something related to your beliefs or your belief system sort of changing or having a revisiting phase at that time, so that you reassess something about your belief system that may not be like a huge life-altering event necessarily, but could be a minor thing that requires you to determine if what you thought previously was really everything that you thought it was, or if there's something that you got wrong or made a mistake that you need to go back and correct or fix in some way. So Mercury retrograde periods are always 3-month periods, or sorry, 3-week periods. So that starts on the 16th of February. The halfway point is already by the 25th of February. And then already in early March, we see Mercury retrograde back into Aquarius, into your 8th house of shared resources, where it eventually stations direct on the 9th of March. So early March, Mercury retrogrades back into Aquarius, and it stations direct on the 9th. So because it's retrograding back into your 8th house, there could be something about shared resources or other people's money that you thought you had completed previously a few weeks earlier, but somehow you have to come back to and revisit. So the 8th house sometimes relates to things like taxes, money that's owed to other people. Other times, if you have a partner, it can indicate the partner's finances. So there may be something related to that you thought was finished, but somehow you have to go back and revisit, and then eventually you can start moving forward again after March 9th. All right, other transits in March. We've got 2 major shifts. One of them is Saturn moves into Aquarius towards the end of the month on the 21st of March. So that's a pretty major shift, because this is the first time that Saturn has moved into Aquarius, and it's kind of a few-month preview of what a longer-term 2 or 3 year transit of Saturn through your 8th house is going to look like. So on the one hand, that's kind of good news, because it's going to move out of your 7th house of relationships and temporarily sort of alleviate some of the more serious tone and maybe even more isolated feelings that you've been having in the sphere of relationships over the past 2 to 3 years. But it's going to bring more seriousness and more focus on restructuring things in the 8th house sphere of other people's money and some of those other financial topics that I was talking about earlier with the Mercury retrograde. And in fact, it's kind of interesting that this month begins with Mercury retrograding back into your 8th house, sort of sets up the possibility of needing to revisit something there in the short term. And then all of a sudden, towards the end of the month, we have not just Saturn ingressing into that same sector of your chart and activating similar topics. We're sort of queuing them up for a longer term transit, but also we have Mars moving into that sign on the 30th of March as well, for about a 1 month or so, a few week transit through that sign. So this is a little bit problematic, because part of what happens as soon as Saturn goes into Aquarius is that Mars joins it, and there's a Mars-Saturn conjunction in early Aquarius, I think in the 1st degree, very, very early in that transit. Let me actually pull up the specific date of that, because I'd like to give you that information here and make sure it's correct. So here's the transit chart for February, March. We can see Saturn moving through the end of Capricorn and getting ready to get out of your 7th house. And then we see Saturn moving into Aquarius in late March, and then Mars catches up with it, and the two can join at 0 degrees of Aquarius around March 30th. So this is a little problematic, because it means whether you have a day chart or you have a night chart, both of those transits indicate some sort of obstacle or some sort of difficulty that comes up very early on when those two planets meet in different houses, depending on what people's rising sign is. For you, if you have Cancer rising, they're meeting in your 8th house. So the two primary topics that we associate with the 8th house are other people's money, or in some instances, the eighth house also has to do with mortality or issues surrounding mortality, which can indicate things like inheritance, but also sometimes just dealing with the broader questions surrounding mortality and what role that plays in your life. So the ingress of Mars and Saturn and their conjunction in early Aquarius in late March and early April will somehow bring those topics or those themes into your life in a way that might demand or might require you sort of dealing with it head on and dealing with it in a way that's kind of sobering, but probably necessary in some way. So the Mars transit, the good news is that it's relatively brief because we see Mars going into Aquarius here in late March, and already Mars leaves about a month later. It looks like it goes into Pisces May 13th. So it's like a month and a half long transit of Mars through that sign. That's going to be the more intense period for those with day charts where sort of issues are more likely to come up, whereas the people with night charts will tend to have more of the issues with the Saturn part of that transit, which also just lasts for about 2 or 3 months this year before it returns back to Capricorn, finishes up that transit, then comes back to Aquarius in December for a longer 2-year type transit. So it's more of a long-term type experience for Saturn, of course, which always spends 2 to 3 years in each sign. All right, so that is March. Those are the two main things. We have the Mercury retrograde station in Aquarius, which then tees up the Saturn and Mars ingress at the very end of that month. Let me take a look and see how the chat is going and if everybody has any questions. Yeah, actually, it looks like there's a lot of discussion. So thanks everyone for joining in and adding stuff. I appreciate it. Gina Scott says, thanks for doing this. Thank you for joining me. All right, so let's go back and let's look at the following month. We're now getting into April and the second quarter of the year. At this point, we have a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction relatively early. This is taking place in the 7th house. One of the things I would say about that is just that Jupiter can sometimes indicate expansion and the desire to like rapidly expand in some area, and Pluto can just intensify whatever planets it touches. So your desire to rapidly expand in the area of relationships may be at its sort of peak at this time when you have this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in early April. I might just caution you to maybe slow down a little bit and maybe not go too fast, especially after a 2-year period where relationships have been a little bit slower or a little bit more dicey. When we have Saturn leaving your 7th house and all of a sudden just Jupiter transiting there, and then it conjoins Pluto, you might want to start moving forward and expanding in the sphere of relationships, but you might want to be careful about not jumping into something too quickly or expanding too rapidly just because you could overextend yourself in some way. But otherwise, it's a perfectly fine, potentially intense transit for relationships happening around that time. What else do we have going on? April's actually not that active in terms of outer planet transits. There is a Pluto station that occurs in Capricorn, but that's kind of just, again, an intensification of some of the 7th house stuff, and it's just connected with, for the most part, that Jupiter transit, which is the other outer planet that's still in that sign at that point, later in April around the 25th. So let's move forward to May. So in May, we've got more activity going on. So the first thing that happens is we have Saturn stationing retrograde in Aquarius. So whatever this long-term Saturn transit is about for you, with Saturn going in Aquarius, that this is just a preview of for a few months in 2020. And really, it's something that doesn't get fully started or doesn't get really going all the way until the end of 2020. This station of Saturn is probably going to tell you if that's going to be an important transit for you, what that's going to be all about. And I would pay attention to some of those 8th house themes that we talked about earlier, because if any major 8th house things happen around this time, around the Saturn station in Aquarius, then that's probably going to be an indication of what is to come and an indication of some of the themes that you're going to be dealing with when Saturn returns to Aquarius later in the year for the next 2 years after that point. So if that has to do with like restructuring finances with your spouse, or your spouse running into like financial issues, or having financial obstacles coming up, like that's a possible recurring theme. If there's some sort of issues with an inheritance that could be like a long-term thing, then that could be a recurring issue for you if that comes up around that time. Just pay attention to it, because it'll be a nice preview of that Saturn transit in the future. All right, so Saturn stations. Mars, interestingly, right around the same time, just 2 days later, finishes up its transit through Aquarius, gets out of your 8th house and moves into your 9th house. So Mars will then be transiting through your 9th house for about like a month or so. And this kind of brings back some of the Mercury retrograde things that we were talking about earlier through your 9th house back in, I think, February, I believe, where that tended to be more about like snafus and stuff. Mars through the 9th house can put more energy towards educational pursuits, towards travel, or towards developing your personal philosophy or beliefs. But it can also show sometimes conflict or tensions coming up in that area for different reasons. So maybe you get into like an intellectual dispute with somebody. Maybe you have to like separate something in terms of your education, like dropping a course if you're in school, due to some issue that you run into at that point. The general theme is just the idea of either the exertion of energy and putting more energy into that area of your life, especially if it's preparing you for something career-wise, or alternatively, it can be just separating from something and having more of a desire to separate, and a necessity to separate yourself in some way in that area of your life for about a month or two. So if you're going on a trip at that time, or you're doing other sorts of 9th house activities, I would just caution you to avoid impulsiveness, because sometimes Mars can lead us to be more impulsive or more reckless in whatever part of the chart it's transiting, and sometimes that impulsivity can get us into trouble. So that's ingressing around the 13th of May. Pretty much simultaneously around the same time, we have Venus, which is stationing retrograde in Gemini, and Gemini is your 12th house. So the 12th house is the house of secrets. Traditionally, the 12th house also has to do with things like enemies. Sometimes it has to do with a bunch of topics. The 12th is kind of a challenging house. Because it's occurring almost simultaneously with the Mars ingress into your 9th, I guess I would just be a little bit careful about, sometimes Venus retrogrades can bring people back into our life, especially in 8-year increments. So 8 years ago was the last time that Venus went retrograde in Gemini. For you, it could bring people back into your life that maybe work at cross purposes to you, or who perhaps you didn't get along with in the past, and it may cause you to have to revisit that relationship in some way in order to understand why that didn't work out, or why the two of you didn't really get along or ended up working at cross purposes. So you have to be a little careful about that, because at the same time, Venus is going to station retrograde square Neptune. So it could cause you to revisit something that maybe wasn't good for you, or a relationship that wasn't that great for you, which maybe you've forgotten since that relationship ended, why exactly it ended, or what wasn't good about it for you. And so perhaps you could go back to something and need kind of a reminder of that during the course of that Venus retrograde period. But just be a little bit careful, because sometimes with Venus square Neptune, that which looks appealing can be not all it's cracked up to be. And that could end up being the point of that transit for you, especially since the 12th can also have to do with things like self-undoing, or ways in which we undermine ourselves. So be careful not to do something that could undermine yourself during that time, especially if it's simply due to not being clear, or having like a nebulous sense of that being a good feeling, even if it's not something that's necessarily good for you. All right, so that's the Venus retrograde that's happening there in Gemini, and that's going to last for a few weeks. It starts on the 13th of May, and we can see it goes through all the way until the 25th of June. It's all entirely in Gemini. If you want a preview of what that might be like, just think back in 8-year increments like 2012, and so on and so forth, all the way as far back as you want to go. And that could give you some preview, because those are the other times that Venus went retrograde in the same sector of your chart. And sometimes there can be repetitions if Venus is an important planet for you during those 8-year increments. All right, so the other major thing that happens right around very weirdly the same time is Jupiter stations retrograde in Capricorn on the 14th of May. So interestingly, this is happening in your 7th house, which again may be emphasizing relationship things happening at this time. So the Jupiter transit itself through your 7th house is just indicating a period of growth and expansion in relationships. This indicates an important or pivotal turning point with respect to that sequence of events over this entire year, over this 12-month period of basically December of 2019 through December of 2020. And this is one of two really important turning points, basically the Jupiter stations, when that should take place. So this, again, may be emphasizing relationship themes, but just be a little careful with the Venus retrograde going retrograde in your 12th house, that it's something that's positive if you're pursuing some relationship, especially if it's a new relationship, and that it's something constructive or supportive of your life rather than something that's sort of problematic. All right, I think those are the major transits for May. So we're almost we're in the middle of the year at this point, and what starts happening is we start getting into eclipse season by June. So let me check out. Okay, so we get into eclipse season by June. That opens basically halfway through the Venus retrograde cycle. We get the Sun-Venus cazimi, which takes place on the 3rd of June. So that's the halfway point. And then right after that, we get a eclipse, which takes place, a lunar eclipse, which takes place on the 5th of June in the sign of Sagittarius. So Sagittarius is your 6th whole sign house, which is the place of work and health, but also if you own a business, it can be a place of like those who work for you or those who are employees or in a subordinate role to you in some way. This is sort of queuing up a series of eclipses where the eclipses are going to stop being in your 7th and 1st houses, so the house of self and the house of other, and it's going to shift towards your 12th house and your 6th house. So this eclipse, especially with the 6th house, can show a culmination, or at least a period of putting greater emphasis and greater attention towards matters pertaining to your work and matters pertaining to your health. So sometimes the reason for that can be that there's a reason, like something that comes up that causes you to just put more attention towards health during that time period. Since this is the first eclipse that's taking place in that sign, and it's queuing up about a year or a year and a half long sequence of eclipses that's going to bounce back and forth between the 6th and the 12th house. It may not be a singular event, but it may be a shift that you notice around that time where you start having to pay more attention to your health for some reason and sort of taking better care of yourself than perhaps you did up to that point. So that's the first eclipse that takes place. Tied in with that, or potentially connected with that, is the next eclipse, which takes place later in the month in the sign of Cancer, in your rising sign. If you're looking at this from the perspective of your rising sign, which is the house that represents both your body and physical vitality, as well as your mind and your character in general. So this is representing, even though it's the end of a series of eclipses that have been bouncing back and forth in Cancer and Capricorn, so your 1st and 7th house, this is a solar eclipse in Cancer, so it should mark my usual keywords for eclipses is either great beginnings or great endings. So this is marking a great beginning, especially for you with respect to your body and physical vitality, but also potentially with respect to changes in your character and your personality that have been happening over the course of the past year and a half, as you've had these successive eclipses in your first house, and you've had to define more clearly who you are and how you appear to the world in general. So if you've been trying to put yourself out more, if you've been trying to develop some aspect of your personality, this is a great time to make the final push to really move into that and to really adopt and sort of own some of those changes and incorporate them into your personality in a way that is having some sense of finality. So now it's the time to finally make that jump or make that leap if it's something that you've been like slowly inching towards but haven't really dived into at this point. In other instances, if it's not a character-based thing, it may be a bodily-based thing, and so it could be connected to the other eclipse in your sixth house, where if there's something you've been needing to change about your physical body or your health or what you do to maintain your body and your health, then this may be a good time to finally make the final changes that will last in the long term. Because since this is an eclipse, it's going to have a 6-month time span where everything might not happen at once, but if you initiate the change at this time, around the time of this eclipse in late June, then it's something that by the end of that 6-month period, you should see some major results. So some people might do something as simple as like start going to the gym, or they might start a new sort of food or dietary type regime in order to maybe incorporate or get better nutrients or something like that. Both of these eclipses seem to really be tied into themes of having to do with your health, but also what it takes to maintain your health in your body versus trying to isolate and remove that which perhaps detracts from your physical health and vitality in ways that aren't healthy. All right, other stuff going on. We've got our second Mercury retrograde of the year taking place in June. So it starts on the 18th of June, where Mercury goes retrograde in the sign of Cancer. So this is your first house. It could indicate a period of, again, just reassessing things with respect to your health and your physical body. There could be something that you thought you had done previously, but where there was a miscommunication or a mistake that forces you to revisit that. And perhaps there's new information that comes out at this time that you didn't know that causes you to make changes that are significant or notable in some way. By the end of the month, we have Venus, of course, stationing direct, which I talked about earlier. And we have Mars finally getting out of Pisces and moving into Aries on the 27th of June and moving into your 10th house of career. So normally this would be a relatively short transit that would just last for like a month or a few weeks, and that would be the end of it. But Mars is actually going to station retrograde in September. So shortly after it moves into Aries and into your 10th house of career, it's going to start slowing down. And so this is going to be an extended transit that's going to last much longer, and it's going to be one of the more characteristic and important transits of the year, especially if Mars is activated in your chart for some reason this year, like through a Time Lord technique like annual perfections or something like that, especially if you're in an Aries perfection year or a Scorpio perfection year. So the 10th house primarily pertains to your career, your overall life direction, your reputation, but also just your public life in general. And sometimes that can extend to people that have a sort of superior position over you. So it can indicate bosses or other superiors if you have any in your line of work. Or if you are your own boss, then it really can be just focused on your reputation and what your overall goals and sort of aspirations are in general. So a Mars ingress into the 10th house can be kind of tricky. It can indicate a period where you have to put a lot more energy into your work and a lot more focus, and you could have a greater expenditure of energy during this time, which might cause some things like physical exhaustion due to just having to exert yourself for an extended period, because this is not a quick Mars jaunt through Aries, but instead it's spending this extended, I think almost like 6-month period in that same sign. So this is more like a marathon when it comes to your career during this second half of the year rather than a short sprint. But that can be positive. Sometimes if there's a new project that you need to launch, sometimes just knowing that it's going to take a lot of work and knowing that this is going to be a period where you're going to have to put more energy into your career than other times can just be good to know about ahead of time. And it may be something you're already aware of and is not terribly surprising. For other people, especially if you have a day chart, a Mars transit through the 10th house could be a period that's more tense, where there could be more friction at work for some reason, or more friction in terms of your job or career, or even in some extreme scenarios, there could be instances of like strife or separation or discord when it comes to your job and your career and your reputation at this time. So the sequence of events that this is tied into is going to begin at this point in late June, but it's not really going to culminate until later in September when Mars slows down and stations retrograde towards the end of Aries in your 10th whole sign house. And we'll get to in a couple of months why that's even more important, because it's actually going to be squaring some of the Capricorn planets in your 7th house of relationships, and there's for perhaps setting up some tensions between your career and your relationships during the second half of the year. Okay, so that Mars ingress is the final thing of June, and then we transition into July and the second half of the year. Let me take a look at the chat and how that's going. So thanks to Alyssa XO for the $10 donation. I appreciate it. This is kind of a long marathon of doing all of these live streams, but it's fun and it's kind of a nice experiment to see how it works. Thanks also to Ryan for the donation. He says transiting Pluto conjunct Saturn and opposite Venus. Okay, yeah, that is one I'll have to maybe come back to. If anybody has an answer for him in the chat, let me know. All right, so let's talk about the second half of the year. All right, so here's the transiting chart for July, or here's the ingresses. One of the things that's happening is there's an eclipse in Capricorn. So this is just barely an eclipse because I think it's not super close to the nodes, but I think in the ephemeris it is being counted as barely an eclipse. So this is going to be the last of the eclipses that takes place in Capricorn in your 7th house of relationships. So it's sort of a culmination of sort of a year and a half now of eclipses bouncing back and forth between your 1st house of self and your 7th house of others. And because it's a solar eclipse, actually I should clarify, because it should be a lunar eclipse that's taking place in July, it's going to represent a culmination of events or climax and bringing to completion of some major themes that have been going on in that area of your life, especially over the past couple of years. So for some of you, this may not have been easy because Saturn has been transiting through that sign at the same time. And at the very top of July, we have Saturn actually retrograding back into Capricorn and returning for the final like 5 or 6 month visit through that sign. So a lot of those themes of obstacles and challenges and sometimes setbacks in relationships that you've already been experiencing for the past 2 years will all sort of culminate at this time, and you'll have a chance to look back at how the past couple of years have gone and sort of revisit some of those themes and figure out what you've learned from them, and if there was anything valuable that you did learn from those experiences that you can incorporate into your life and can use to sort of grow and develop as a person so that you can avoid similar situations going into the future. So obviously sometimes there are things that we can learn from like challenging obstacles that come up in our life. Other times just random stuff happens and there's not a lot you can do or learn from it. But either way, it's a good period from this point forward, from July forward, to assess how things have gone in the sphere of relationships for you in the past couple of years and just figure out what you can gain from it so that you can close down that chapter of your life and then finally move forward and put it completely in the past by the end of the year when all of this wraps up in December. So this is the beginning of the end of that transit in July, with Saturn moving back into Capricorn and the final eclipse taking place in that sign around July 5th. Mercury, interestingly, which has been retrograde in Cancer in your first house, stations direct not long after that on the 12th of July. So there's some clarification or rectification of matters, which becomes focused on your first house of self. While that might not otherwise be a major transit for you, a Mercury retrograde, the fact that it's in the first house and it's highlighting that axis of your first house and your seventh house seems kind of notable. Of course, around this time, we've got a new moon in Cancer, but that happens every month and it's not a major eclipse. So that may not be super notable. And that's pretty much the major stuff that's happening in July is just that Mercury retrograde station and the eclipse in Capricorn and Saturn retrograding back into Capricorn. This takes us into August. August isn't super active in terms of outer planet transits. It's mainly inner planet transits and ingresses and lunations. The one notable thing that is worth mentioning is Uranus will station retrograde at 10 degrees of Taurus on August 15th. So this is the furthest into Taurus that Uranus will get this year or has gotten by this point. And if you have anything at around 10 degrees of fixed signs, then you should really start to feel that transit of Uranus by this time, which again, as I was talking about earlier, because it's going through your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances, it may be causing or coinciding with a period of instability or a period of shakeups when it comes to your friends and the groups and the alliances that you have in your life. But ultimately, for some people, that's going to be kind of an exciting shakeup that could push you in a direction that you might not have gone otherwise if there hadn't been a sort of loosening up in that area of your life. So it could be, although somewhat unsettling, ultimately productive, albeit somewhat perhaps unexpected or disruptive. So if you have, again, just planets in early fixed signs around 10 degrees, then you're really going to feel that. But for others, if you don't have planets until later degrees of fixed signs, then that transit may not really fully set in your life until a few years from now. So that's the main thing for August. For September, September is really focused on the Mars retrograde. I mean, that's the primary thing that we have going on, which is that Mars has been moved into Aries a few months ago now, all the way back in, June. The end of June, Mars moved into Aries into your 10th house of career, but then it slowed down and started moving super slow until eventually it stations retrograde in the later degrees of Aries on the 9th of September in your 10th whole sign house, so in the house of career. So this is one of two really pivotal turning points where if you're going to run into issues related to either greater exertion in the sphere of your career, so having more events taking place and having to expend more energy in the sphere of your career, or alternatively, if you're going to run into tensions or strife in the sphere of your career, then this time period when Mars stations is really going to be one of the two most pivotal periods. So the very first station of Mars in that sign is the first one, and the second one is when Mars eventually will station direct several weeks later, earlier in Aries. So one of the reasons this is important, and one of the ways that we might be able to understand what it's doing in your chart, is by realizing that when Mars goes retrograde in your 10th house, it's not just aspecting and activating 10th house topics, but oftentimes a planet will activate topics in the other angular houses as well. So Mars stationing in your 10th house of career is also going to be squaring your first house of body and mind. So it could be indicating a period, especially if it's squaring the degree of your ascendant, where you could be a little bit more irritable mentally, or physically you could, through the expenditure of so much energy through your career, you could push yourself too far and sort of exhaust yourself physically in the first house representation of the body. Additionally, with Mars going through the 10th house of career, it's going to be opposing the 4th house of the home and the living situation. So sometimes needing to figure out a balance between your public life and your private life, and perhaps putting more energy into one and creating problems in the other. So putting so much emphasis on your work could indicate creating some problems or some tensions at home in your living situation. And then finally, at the same time, Mars will be squaring your seventh house. And for some of you, maybe squaring the degree of your descendant, so that some of the things happening at work could create tensions, especially in terms of your relationships, or if you're in a long-term relationship, or if you're in a marriage, tensions with your marriage partner. So I mentioned that especially because one of the things that's notable when Mars stations retrograde is just how close it is to squaring Saturn, as well as to a lesser extent Jupiter and Pluto in late Capricorn at that time. So let me move the charts forward to September, and then we'll see what that actually looks like in terms of the specific degrees that the planets are occupying at that time. So here's the Mars station at 28 degrees of Aries. So again, that's going to be especially important if you have your ascendant in the later degrees of Cancer. So if you have like 28 degrees of Cancer rising, for example, it would be squaring your ascendant, as well as squaring your descendant. But notice how Mars at 28 degrees of Aries is pretty closely squaring Saturn at 25 degrees of Capricorn. So that's one of the reasons why, for example, if your ascendant is in late Cancer, then Mars is going to be squaring your ascendant-descendant axis, and then Saturn's going to be hovering around your descendant at the same time. So that's one of the reasons why I tend to think that, especially for people with late Cancer rising, that the majority of the focus here could be on the tensions between the 10th house in your work and the 7th house in your relationships, or that somehow tensions in the sphere of your career could create tensions in the sphere of relationships. And so one of your challenges during this time is just going to be figuring out how to balance the two, and how to let some of the pressure out, sort of like a pressure valve, so that things don't sort of explode in one of those areas if there's no sort of release that allows you to sort of relieve some of the tension. All right, so that's one of the main things in September, is just that Mars station and a sort of culmination of events with respect to whatever that transit is about for you in your 10th house of career. Around the same time, Jupiter stations direct in the earlier degrees of Capricorn. So this is another hopefully positive, but either way pivotal turning point with respect to the Jupiter transit through your 7th house of relationships. So especially for those of you with day charts, that's kind of a positive thing. Let me throw up a chart with Cancer rising and show you Jupiter stationing direct here around September 12th, 13th. So that's a little bit helpful, because at least it's bringing some positive forward movement or forward direction when it comes to the positive significations of Jupiter in the sphere of relationships, which hopefully will balance out some of the tension aspects that we're seeing, especially earlier in the month, between Mars and Saturn in that square. Elsewhere in that month, we have Saturn stationing direct for its final direct station in the sign of Capricorn. So that's basically indicating the beginning of the end of that transit and the final stretch of Saturn going through Capricorn when it stations direct in that sign around 25-ish degrees on the 29th of September. So for those of you where that's been like a difficult transit, it'll be wrapping up the last of the difficulties. And for those of you where that's been a constructive transit, where you've built more structures and more firm foundations into your relationships, this is going to be like putting the final brick in whatever that structure is in your 7th house of relationships, and then just sort of sweeping things up as you make your way out of that transit over the course of the next 5 or 6 months between now and December. All right, so that takes us in eventually to the following month, which is the month of October. And in October, it looks like we've got Pluto stationing direct in Capricorn, which isn't a big deal because that's just, again, more ongoing 7th house stuff. We do have a Mercury retrograde, which is beginning in October, which I believe is stationing retrograde in Scorpio, which is your 5th house of the 5th house has to do with things like children, if you have any children, It can also have to do with issues pertaining to creativity or pleasure and what you do for fun and enjoyment, as well as the fifth house has to do with sex traditionally. So this Mercury retrograde is kind of unique because it's not like the other two where it just stays in one sign, but instead Mercury is going to station retrograde in Scorpio in your fifth house, and then it's going to fall back into your fourth house of your home and your living situation and your family. So for some of you, there could be some sort of connection or some sort of need to revisit some actions that took place just prior to the Mercury retrograde when it started moving into its shadow, and when it moved through your fourth house and your fifth house initially, where there could be a connection between like children and parents or children and your living situation that has to be revisited, or which should have been an easy or a quick matter, but for some reason ends up needing you to spend extra time sort of dwelling on it for a 3 or 4 week period during the course of the Mercury retrograde. So Mercury will station retrograde on the 13th of October, but then it retrogrades back into Libra by the 27th and back into your fourth house, which could cause you to have to revisit something in terms of your living situation or your family, or alternatively your private life. And then eventually Mercury will station direct in Libra at the very beginning of November, on November 3rd. So by that time, you should start to see some rectification of the events or of the snafus that took place in that part of your life, and it should start to be wrapped up at that time. Elsewhere in October, we've got lunations, Jupiter sextile Neptune's not really anything to write home about necessarily. Yeah, I think that's it for outer planet transits in October. It's really primarily just that Mercury retrograde that takes place starting in the middle of the month. So this takes us into November. Mercury stations direct at the very top of the month. Additionally, besides that, we have Jupiter conjunct Pluto in your seventh house for the very last time. And again, that idea of like expanding rapidly in the sphere of relationships and creating new structures there. At the same time, we have Mars, more notably and probably more importantly, Mars stationing direct in Aries in your 10th house. So if there was a period of running into obstacles or difficulties or feelings of frustration in terms of your career, and that causing tensions in other areas of your life, like in the area of relationships, that starts to be resolved and starts to, it's not going to be fully over, but it starts to clear itself up by the time that Mars stations direct on the 13th of November. So you start to get the beginning of the end of that transit, because Mars then is going to start moving forward again, and then will eventually by early next year make its way out of Aries and out of your 10th house of career. And the very end of the month, we see Neptune stationing direct in Pisces, which is your 9th house. And I only want to mention that because this is a very long transit of Neptune through Pisces that lasts for like a decade. It's going through your 9th house of belief and religion, and it can create some nebulousness surrounding your beliefs or what your ideas are surrounding belief systems or religion. This isn't necessarily going to be an important turning point in terms of that, but it's something that's worth mentioning as something you're going through for most of this decade, where there's maybe things about your beliefs that are not very clearly defined during that time. But that's okay, because sometimes that can be necessary and that can be important to go through a period where things aren't as fixed or aren't as well developed, and you have a period to try out and sort of test out different beliefs in different manners, without necessarily having to settle on a single one. So maybe once that transit is over and once you get out the other side of it, you may become a little bit more settled on something specific. But during this time, if you find yourself sort of going from belief to belief, or learning different things and exposing yourself to different educational programs, I think that that's okay. And I think you shouldn't necessarily be too hard on yourself if you're worried that things have become too blurry in terms of some of your different beliefs in life. All right, so that's actually not the major transit, though. The last major transit in November is an eclipse that takes place. So we start moving into eclipse season again, and we get a lunar eclipse, which takes place in the sign of Gemini. And Gemini is your 12th house. So this is tied into, it's not just that eclipse there, but also there's another eclipse that takes place in Sagittarius in your 6th house of work and health, or work and illness, depending on how you want to frame that, on the 14th of December. So this means that on the one hand, we're returning back to something that was kind of initiated 6 months earlier. And part of this has to do with this 6th house, 12th house illness axis with some of the health issues and some of the things that you may have initiated in terms of your health and how you try to maintain your health that you started over the previous summer. Some of those things that you started at that time, you're going to start to see results. So if you initiated something that was like a positive health program in terms of changing dietary things or starting to work out or do something else to improve your body and how you maintain your body, you'll probably start to see results at this time once we start hitting these eclipses. On the other hand, if there's something that you started that was problematic somehow for health or was not supportive of either your bodily vitality or your mental vitality, which is very much a 12th house type of signification, then you might just start to see some of the negative side effects of that happening or starting to manifest around this time once we hit the eclipse on the 30th of November and then the next eclipse on the 14th of December. So rarely is this like a single event, but instead usually it's like a sequence of events or a series of events. I would just be careful that whatever you're initiating in your life at this time, try to do it as constructively as possible. That way, this is like a sequence of events in 6-month time periods where you're building something up that's positive and that is supportive of you rather than something that is negative or destructive, especially something that's sort of self-destructive or that undermines you in some way. So this takes us finally to the last month of the year, which is December. And aside from the eclipses happening, the major thing that's happening in December is we get the completion of the 3-year transit of Saturn through Capricorn and through your 7th house of relationships, as well as the completion of Jupiter's 12-month transit through Capricorn and through your sphere of relationships as well. So suddenly there's this huge shift that takes place where a lot of the emphasis, not just with the Saturn and Jupiter transits, which the Saturn transit began 3 years ago at this point in December of 2017, but also the shift of the eclipses away from your 1st house and your 7th house as well. So whatever's been going on for you in the sphere of relationships over the course of the past 3 years, and especially over the past year, especially since the beginning of 2020 or the end of 2019, all of that just sort of comes to an end at this point in December, and a lot of the emphasis on relationships is no longer there. There's something that is completed, and you sort of move on from that at this point in December of 2020. So what happens, though, is we get more of a shift towards your 8th house, and Saturn begins a 2-year transit through Aquarius and through your 8th house, and Jupiter begins a 1-year transit through Aquarius in your 8th house. So I talked about this earlier in 2020 because we had that preview of what some of the themes are going to be like when Saturn first dipped into Aquarius between March and June. But that was just a little taste of what this transit will be about, and it really begins in earnest at this time. So again, just to reiterate some of the themes of the 8th house from the poster that I put out this year when we did the Significations of the Houses episode. The 8th house has to do with topics like mortality and your relationship towards mortality, whether it's your own or whether it's that of people around you or just the topic in general and how you feel about it. But also issues related to inheritance, to the assets belonging to others, as well as other people's money in general, which can sometimes, if you're in, for example, a long-term partnership or a marriage, it can indicate something going on with your partner's finances where maybe in previous years they had been doing better financially, but there's some sort of challenge or some sort of restructuring that has to take place with respect to their finances, which can sometimes affect you in different ways. It's nice because at least in the first part of this transit, Jupiter will be joining Saturn, and those two planets will form a conjunction for the first time in 20 years in Aquarius towards the end of December. And Jupiter will help to kind of balance out, whereas Saturn can sometimes indicate losses and a period of like tightening up or constriction here, especially surrounding financial matters or the finances involving others. Jupiter is going to balance that out a little bit and bring a little bit more of a positive or optimistic vibe, so that even if there are some challenges, there's probably going to be some positive counterbalancing things that are either going to help to balance out the pitfalls of Saturn, or they're at least going to indicate that if there's something challenging that comes up, there may be something positive that comes up in that area at the same time in parallel. So I've seen things when people have both a malefic planet and a benefic planet transiting the 8th house, where they have somebody where there's some issue of a loss of somebody or a issue of death or mortality, but then they turned out to inherit a large amount of money or something like that because of the benefic side of the transit. So that's one extreme example, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that extreme, but it can give you an example of just both positive and negative things happening in that sphere of your life at the same time. We've had a little bit of that in 2020 with both of those planets transiting through your 7th house, but now for 2021, the energy shifts towards your 8th house. But I guess I'll have to save more of the details and more of the forecast of that for next year, since most of that transit really doesn't go into effect until 2021, since the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn takes place at the very end of December. So I think then, looking at the calendar, that's pretty much it. There's the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on the 21st, and that brings us to the end of 2020 for those that have Cancer and Cancer rising. All right. Thanks everybody who joined me in the live chat. This has been good. I haven't really had a chance to follow everyone's comments as much as I would have liked, but I hope everybody had enjoyed following this, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. If you have already had some experience with some of these transits that you want to share, then please post them either in the live chat or in the comments section below this video, because I always like hearing comments and hearing how some of these transits have actually played out for people, because while I try to describe them in relatively broad, like archetypal terms, it's really interesting then when sometimes people can take that and then explain the specifics of how that's played out for them based on their actual birth chart and the specific placements in it. And that's when things get really interesting. So yeah, thanks a lot everyone for joining me. Thanks to Core J. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for being a patron. That reminds me I need to plug all of that stuff, since the only reason I'm able to do this is because of the support of patrons who support the Astrology Podcast through my page on Patreon. So, in particular, thanks to patrons Christine Stone, Nate Craddock, and Tanner Robinson, as well as the Astro Gold Astrology app available at astrogold.io, the Portland School of Astrology available at portlandastrology.org, and the Honeycomb Collective Personal Astrological Almanacs available at honeycomb.co. There's two major astrology conferences happening this year. One of them is hosted by the International Society for Astrological Research, and that conference is happening in Denver, Colorado, September 10th through the 14th. You can find out more information at esar2020.org. And then there's also the Northwest Astrological Conference. It's happening in Seattle, May 21st through the 25th, 2020. More information about that at norwac.net. If you want to become a patron of the Astrology Podcast and get bonus content like early access to new episodes, then you can find out more information about that or sign up at patreon.com/astrologypodcast. Most of the artwork for this episode, like with the significations of the houses diagram, the planetary alignments, and the planetary movements, is actually available in a poster set that I just released. So that it contains 3 posters that show you all of the major transits that are going to happen during the course of the year. So a lot of this stuff that I've been talking about, you can sort of put it on your wall and see when some of those transits will be starting or ending at a glance. So you can find out more information about that at theastrologypodcast.com/2020 posters. And then finally, Leisa, Schaim, and I just released our 2020 Auspicious Elections Full Year Ahead Electional Report, where we went through each of the next 12 months and we picked out one lucky day during each of those 12 months to launch different types of ventures and undertakings using the principles of electional astrology. So I put a promo video about that out just a few days ago on my YouTube channel, or you can find out more information about it at theastrologypodcast.com/2020 posters, or actually it's chrisbrennanastrologer.com/2020 report or 2020 elections. Just visit the website and you'll find out more information about that. And I'll have to update my graphics here. All right. Thanks everybody for joining me. Thanks for watching the live stream or watching this video. I'm going to take a little break and then I'll be back again to do a live stream and record the horoscope forecast for Leo and Leo rising. So thanks everyone for joining me, and I'll see you next time.